Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Luca Buvoli, the director of Montreuil School of Art, multidisciplinary MFA here at MICA. And welcome to MICA's Mixed Media series, which brings notable art makers, designers, and thinkers to campus to fuse our community with their insights and practices. The aim of this series is to build imaginative public events that showcase the diversity of practice in our field and the complex relationship between creativity and the world around us. Before I introduce our lecturer this afternoon, I'd like to thank all of you who came from near and far to attend this lecture, and a special thanks to all of MICA's programs and departments who have worked in organizing these events. MICA's president and provost, first of all, academic affairs, communications, and the Office of Events. A particular thanks to our graduate assistants, Meghana Gavira-Digari, Ben Chatag, Nina Allen, and Bev Jokelson, who manage many aspects in the organization of this event, and to our previous program coordinator, Fawn Hung, and our new one, Maren Henson. A couple of lines about the practice and accomplishment of our guest today. Joan Jonas is a world-renowned artist whose work encompasses a wide variety of media, including video, performance, installation, sound, text, and sculpture. Jonas' experiments and production in the late 60s and the early 70s continue to be crucial to the development of many contemporary art genres, and from performance to video to conceptual art and theater. Working between mediums and across genres, like biography, mythology, folklore, she has animated countless intellectual and artistic experiments in translation, technology, and narrative. She's often called as a pioneer, and her work is often a site of collaboration. In her own words, I always merge with the subject I'm trying to understand and represent. Since 1968, her practice has explored ways of seeing, the rhythm of rituals, and the authority of objects and gestures. Joan Jonas' work has been the subject of many solo shows at places like Le Plateau and Jeux de Paume in Paris in 2005, the Museu d'Art Contemporani de Barcelona in 2007 and 2008, the Centre d'Art Contemporain Genève in Geneva in 2008, Hangar Bicocca in Milano, Tate Modern in London in 2018. And without mentioning the retrospectives at the Van Haben Museum in Eindhoven in the Netherlands in 1979, the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam in 1983 and 1994, Staatsgalerie in Stuttgart in Germany 2001, and the Queen's Museum of Art in New York in 2003 and 2004, among many others. Well, those of you who have had the chance to visit the newly reopened Museum of Modern Art in New York will enjoy a larger room installation with many pieces entirely dedicated to Joan Jonas' works. In addition, Joan Jonas has presented major performances at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis in 1974, The Kitchen in New York, 1972, 1975, 2004, and 2016, San Francisco Museum of Art in 1976, the Kunstmuseum in Bern, 2004, the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive in 2008, Performer, New York, 2013 and 19, Dance Space in New York, 2018. And one of the greatest honor for an artist, as Joan Jonas represented the United States at the 56th Venice Biennale in 2015, and has participated in 6 editions of Documenta in Kassel, 1972, 77, 82, 87, 2002, 2012. very impressive, actually. Joan Jonas is currently Professor Emerita at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, in the program in Art, Culture, and Technology in Boston, and is the author of reference texts on the performing arts. Some of our faculty and recent visiting artists actually have been students of Joan Jonas. So they were very glad to know that she would have come here. And in addition, Joan Jonas received many international fellowships, grants, awards. In 2018, she was awarded the prestigious Kyoto Prize, presented to those who have contributed significantly to the scientific, cultural, and spiritual betterment of humankind. She lives and works in New York. So we are particularly thrilled to see that Joan has accepted to come here today and share her perspective with our MICA students and our guests. Please join me in welcoming Joan at MICA.
I say there's a box for me to stand on. I'm glad. Thank you very much, Luca, and I'm delighted to be here. And thank you, MICA, for inviting me. And this is the first time I actually had to write this talk for the Kyoto Prize, and I've never written out my lectures. And so, and the new experience is that I have to change the slides while I'm giving you this, while I'm reading the lecture. So please bear with me. In university, my studies were in art history, literature, and sculpture. I then went to art school and continued with sculpture while concentrating on drawing being the basic element of my work. What you see there is, I was very influenced by magic shows growing up, and still am, but I don't go to them anymore, but this is an iconic image from a magic show. When I switched from sculpture to performance in the mid-60s, I had to think about this new form and consider how to work with it in order to develop a new language. I made this statement at the time. I didn't see a major difference between a poem, a sculpture, a film, or a dance. A gesture has for me the same weight as a drawing. Draw, erase, memory, erase. When I was studying art history, I was also influenced by the musicals I saw in New York as a child. Sorry. When I was studying art history, I looked carefully at the space of paintings, films, and sculpture, how illusions are created within a framed space, and how to deal with real physical space with depth and distance. I would also begin with props or objects such as a mirror, a cone, or a TV, or a story. Sassetta, who you see here, and Piero della Francesca are two Renaissance painters that I really loved. I was interested in the geometric forms and how the space of architecture was depicted in the space of the city. In Sassetta, I was drawn to the form, the delicate colors, the magic. A major love and influence was Giacometti. His figures, sometimes tiny, sometimes enormous, occupied and commanded a focused space. This element of illusion was also in the circus and the magic shows I had seen as a child. The idea of alchemy, the transformation of material, is essential to my thinking. When I went to the southwest of the United States and saw the landscapes there, I understood why stories of gods were made up by all cultures in early times. It was so overwhelming to see the landscape for me in an unexplainable way that I understood why it had to be explained by myths and stories. This is my first film, Wind, in 1968. It was filmed outdoors on the coldest day of the year, though it was based on an indoor piece. It is silent, by the way. The wind became a character and a force. The wind turned what could have been a familiar everyday movement into a comedy of chaos. Forces of nature in the landscape continue to be a major presence, as is wind. I was very influenced by film, as well as by modernist poetry and literature. I learned so much by looking at the early films of Vertov, Eisenstein, Podovkin, Ozu, and others. I was drawn to the idea of one image next to another, and in a related way to the series of close-ups to build a narrative. I was affected by the use of landscape, and landscape is one of my primary locations for my work. After seeing silent films, one is more aware of how sound could be used in a particular way. I began my study of film independently by attending film screenings. This is a photograph of me in my mirror costume. I had never seen anything like. I was taken aback. At the Ethnology Film Archives, established by Jonas MICA. Metaphor is an aspect of my visual language. How does one tell a story with sound and image in time? What is the function of an image? In modernist poetry, the structure of the haiku can combine two images to make a third, like Ezra Pound's In the Stations of a Metro from 1913. Quote, "The apparitions of these faces in a crowd, petals on a wet black bough." End of quote. When I began to work with time-based media, I had to invent ways of structuring sequences of images, so I worked with the language of montage. In the 1960s, when I knew I wanted to make performance-based work, I attended dance workshops, performances, and happenings by visual artists and dancers. I was also looking at film, painting, and sculpture, how art is a dialogue with the past and the future. I'm constantly looking for both familiar and strange objects in flea markets at home and away that might become props in my work. The objects I use are not literal adaptations of the elements of the story or concept, but are symbolic, archetypal. For example, the actuality of the form, the cone, was an instrument, to channel sound to the audience. I could whisper in their ears, look through it, listen to it, and yell through it, sing, always directing sound to a place. Funnel, a piece I did in 1974, was based on the form of a cone. I made many paper cones of different sizes and proportions. I started working with 9-foot tin cones in '76 and continued to be inspired by this form. My inspiration includes travel, collecting objects, and the practices of other cultures and their rituals. Ritual is part of my language, my own ritual, although I'm interested in the ritual of other cultures. In studying art history, every painting has a story, and many practices begin in ritual. The No theater, Japanese No theater, began as ritual. I studied the early periods of art, the Minoan and the Mycenaean period. I spent a year in Greece and several months in Crete because I was drawn to the Minoan myths of the women diving in the sea with dolphins. In the 60s, when I was doing research and getting prepared to go into performance, I saw the Hopi snake dance in the Southwest, which was amazing, outdoors, and beautiful. Needless to say, I do not copy these rituals, and particularly, I just want to say now, in respect to the Hopi, one does not in any way appropriate the images from any Native American culture. All of these ideas have continued through the years and have been applied in different ways to later work. How to alter the image through various media, and then alter what is there later, using layering devices and reflection to alter how the audience perceives what they see. I've continuously stepped from the making of a performance to making autonomous films and video works, and then to installations and back, while moving elements back and forth from one form to another. The first prop I used was the mirror. And as you saw in Wind, we had costumes with mirrors pasted onto them. I got the idea from reading the Argentinian writer Jorge Luis Borges. I was very intrigued by how he wrote about mirrors and space, and the infinite multiplication of space as a library. the endless library that went on and on. So I made several performances with mirrors. These pieces consisted of a group of about 17 people walking very slowly, very carefully, moving in choreographed movements in the space. The mirrors faced the audience. In turn, the audience, in return, the audience saw the reflected, fractured space, the others performers, and themselves. So what you're seeing now is a recent reconstruction from notes and photographs of Mirror Piece 1 and 2, which was originally performed in the late 1960s and early 70s. The mirror was a metaphor for me, a device to alter the image and to include the audience as reflection, making them uneasy as they view themselves in public. The fragility of the mirrors and glass that could actually break also caused discomfort, beauty with an edge offset. Outdoor works, which I began in 1970, also involve the viewpoint of the audience. My early work developed in a particular context and place. In the 1960s, some parts of New York looked like ruins. Parts of the Lower West Side, for example, and the docks nearby along the Hudson River. These were places to explore. The first outdoor piece, Joan's Beach piece, in 1970, was about perception in the distant, how one sees the action of a sound like hitting blocks of wood together, and split seconds later, one hears the sound. Space is flattened by the distance. Certainly one can relate it to the history of painting and representation of flatness and the idea of trying to create the illusion of depth through the perspective of color and form. These are other images from the Joan's Beach piece. Again, using mirrors and a ladder and working in the mudflats behind the beach. I first went to Japan in 1970 and saw the No Theater. It had a significant influence on me and my work. It was then that I started experimenting with masks and used them in the outdoor works. They inspire me to move in a different way, behave in a different way, and mask my personality, which I like. The sound of wood hitting wood in the No inspired me to work with wood blocks, clapping the sound delay in my outdoor performances. This image that you see now is from a book that I have many of them that I got while I was in Japan looking at the No Theater, and they are the patterns of movements in the No Theater, and they're very beautiful drawings, as you can see. There are many of them. What you're seeing now is a piece called Nova Scotia Beach Dance. Although the piece was happening on the beach itself, it was seen by a group standing on the cliff above. When I moved to Soho in 1968, it was relatively empty, and artists were able to move into old, recently abandoned factory lofts that had the beauty of another time. It wasn't expensive to find a place to perform or exhibit one's work. You could work on the streets, lots, and docks without getting permission from the city. My performance and video reflected that setting. It was an atmosphere, grainy and rough, like early video. This performance is Delay, Delay from 1972 with a group of people who, as usual, were friends and artists. For instance, Gordon Matta Clark is in this piece. I would work on location, in this case, the empty lots of the Lower West Side of New York, for a few months with the ideas developed at Joan's Beach and for the Nova Scotia Beach Dance, and then rehearse with a group before performing in public. For Delay, Delay, the audience sat on the roof of a loft building on Chambers Street, overlooking those empty lots where old factory buildings had just recently been torn down. This work dealt with the perception of distance along with the overhead view of action. I'm going to play this. This is a small fragment of the film Song Delay. Oh, can we have the sound up? Sound, sorry. I forgot to tell the people that we need sound during one part. Is there any way to get sound? because you really should hear this. You can tell me, and then I'll just go on if there isn't a way. Is there a way? Excuse me, I should have thought of this. Well, what you see here, we used simple props, like the big piece of plywood, manipulating it, throwing it around, hiding behind it. And the hoop that you saw before was a prop that I used in many ways over the years in different situations. And actually I was inspired by Houdini, who, and also by the composer Stravinsky, who built a tube that he used to roll around his studio. He strapped himself into it, and it rolled around the studio. And it was very good for his circulation. It made him feel good. You could just tell me, like, yell out at me if it's possible. Okay, well, what I'll do is I'll just maybe come back to this because I'd like you to. And then the next piece I want to play sound too. So I'll quickly go through these. We'll go, this has sound too. So this is, we'll come back to that. So this is a video from my first video performance, Organic Honey's Visual Telepathy. And, okay, I'm going to just, sorry. So in general, there was a live camera in the performance space. At first I operated the camera, but later I had a camera person as performer. All movements and shots were set up beforehand and rehearsed. There was a small monitor in the space so that I, the performer, could frame my actions. The audience saw this live performance simultaneously with the image transmitted from the camera to the projection and or the monitor. This was often a detail of the live action, so the experience was of double narrative linked. In subsequent video performances, I continue to explore this space of perception. I am interested in drawing during performance. A drawing in the performance is different than drawing alone in my studio, where there are no witnesses. The performance affects the drawing. As Organic Honey, I drew for the monitor while looking at the monitor and not at the drawing. I think continuously of how to work with screens, for instance. And here you see the vertical roll, which is another. How to design the screen and how to work with projection on the screen. I'm interested in creating my own special effects using my own technological trickery. I'll just say a little bit more. Organic Honey's visual telepathy evolved as I found myself continuously investigating the monitor of my video machine. I then bought a mask of a doll's face, which transformed me into an erotic seductress. I named this TV persona Organic Honey. I became increasingly obsessed with following the process of my own theatricality as my images fluctuated between the narcissistic and a more abstract representation. I explored narcissism. It was kind of a taboo subject at the time in the early 70s during minimalism. And so that was attractive to me in a way, to bring that into my language. I attempted to fashion a dialogue between my different disguises. This was in part inspired by the feminist movement of the time. It was greatly, and what the piece represented was, the piece was also related to my study of mythology and persona, but I wanted to explore the idea of the female image, which we talked about a lot at that time. Is there a female, the male image, the female? So I was attempting to explore whether or not there is such a female image. And so I thought of the female, I thought of making female images all throughout. And then later on in subsequent works, I just went on to think that there's a sliding scale between the male and the female. And as you all know now, I don't have to tell you. The audience saw this live performance with the image. Yeah, I already said that. Sorry. We'll go on to Mirage. These are other images from the organic honey performance, so you can see this structure. And in this one, I'm making something called the Endless Drawing, which is a piece I borrowed from the Moluccan Book of the Dead, a tribe in New Guinea. I had a book called Spiritual Disciplines, and I did take that. I always give it credit. And these are other images from... The dog has been a part of my work from the very beginning. Dog drawings, dog performers. My dogs, I've had 3 dogs. They're all performers. Mirage from 1976, which, as Luca said, is the latest and last version, which is an installation, is up at the MoMA, if you have a chance to see it. It was the last of a series of video performances working with early black and white technology, and was structured in relation to the projection screen of the cinematic. I first did it at Anthology Film Archives, and I went between video and cinema in reference to that screen, which is a moving screen. I won't really describe that too well. I used the structure of the screen to structure the different moments in the performance because I could change the shape and size of the screen. It was a film screen in which there was a... And as you can see, the props included a group of 9-foot tin cones, a small hoop, and a Central American wooden mask of a man. There was a 30-minute drawing film shot by Babette Mangold, and in the performance, I only used a few minutes, drawing and erasing in chalk on a blackboard. I was inspired by the films of Maya Deren, the American filmmaker who spent time in Haiti filming the voodoo rituals. Practitioners, well, this is part, I used the volcano image of volcanoes erupting. I found footage of that and performed running in front of it in reference to the shape of the cone. And I'll just let this play a little bit. I refer to this piece, and I've used it. Practitioners were making drawings over and over again on the dark ground with lines of white powder that is in the voodoo ceremonies. I was very lucky to see Maya Deren. I didn't know her work in 1976 working on this film. And I was very lucky to see this 4 hours of unedited footage of films that she shot in Haiti, which was, for me, a much better way than seeing the edited version, which came out later, of her work. It interests me to go back to an early work, take part of it, and work with it in relation to other material. If you see the piece in MoMA, you'll see that this is part of it too, that I have added another film parallel to the first film, and I show the entire drawing tape of it. It's half an hour long. And I made a second film using footage from that period of time in the 70s when I made this film. And the reason for that was, it was very esoteric. We were in our studios. The Vietnam War was going on. Nixon was president. And so I wanted to bring a little reference to that into the second film. And there are scenes shot from TV with references to the period, all that I shot at the time. So I divide my work into periods. So the first was the mirror period, and then the outdoor works, and then the video period. And now, of course, all these overlap. And so this period is what I call the period of the narrative, where I started working with stories. And the first story I chose was The Juniper Tree, which is a Grimm's Brother fairy tale. It happened to be my friend Susan Howe's son's favorite fairy tale. I always say that because it's pretty grim. But anyway, in 76, I started working with narrative or storytelling. As with the mirror, the video, I would say the narrative was another altering medium in which the image relates to a story and is affected by the story. This is the first version of Juniper Tree. It was made for children. I later altered that piece and made a solo of it in which I played all the parts. For instance, I made a structure which was a stage set. By the way, in my performances, when I stepped into performance, I did think of the places where I performed. I made stage sets I thought of that it was a relation to my work in sculpture. So I thought of these structures as stage sets. And I don't have any images of it, but I made a piece in Philadelphia at the ICA called Stage Sets. It's a big installation. I think it's going to be at Dia Beacon Dia Beacon next fall. And it is actually called Stage Sets, that piece. I never performed in it. It was simply, an installation of a stage set. I never perform in my installations, by the way. I always perform in a separate space because the situation is quite different. So, for instance, I represented the tree with a ladder, which is an iconic way of representing a tree. The wooden rope structure was the house. I made red and white drawings. When I began working with a story, I analyze it, take it apart. I note the colors, in this case, red and white. Red is blood and white is snow. Very traditional fairy tale colors. In this particular fairy tale, there is a boy and a girl. In the performance for children, we played all the characters in this version. Later, I represented all the characters. On the red cloth, I drew an anatomical heart and turned it into a face representing the boy. On the white, for the girl, I drew a valentine and turned it into a face, each step at a different moment in the performance. I then hung the drawings on the wall. They became part of the set. This is in the Whitechapel Gallery, where I had to change the installation for that space. Were we able to play sound? Never mind. In 1994, I think there's a lot of material for you to take in anyway. So, in 1994, when I had a show at the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam. Sorry. So now I'm going to talk about my installations. And when I had a show at the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, I made a stage set that related. I made an installation that related to a Irish story, Sweeney Astray, translated by Seamus Heaney, that I made especially for this show. It was a new piece. I made a performance in collaboration with a theater group. So this is the installation of Sweeney Astray, which I later showed at the Hangar Bicocca. And it's an ancient Irish poem. Very beautiful. I'll talk about that later. This is the installation of the organic honey work. I wanted the audience to experience the work in a different way. I take all the elements, the video, the sound, the structures, the screens, the props, and I reconstruct them. In other words, I take the performance apart. So it's not based on linear time, but exists in a different experience of time. The audience chooses what to look at and when. As they walk through this piece, the sounds of different videos play together. Later, there were different solutions for the sound situation. This is an installation of Mirage, as I mentioned earlier, 2 films side by side, the drawing film and the film I made to go with it, and with the stage, which I actually performed on at the Anthology Film Archives, and I've already spoken about that piece. This is the performance of the next major work that I began to work on, Volcano Saga, based on an Icelandic saga. I began to work with projections as backdrops for the performance, and in this case there are 3 backdrops. The video was edited to form a parallel narrative to the live action. Screens, in this case, they're on 3 different screens. 2 projections, the big ones, show continuous moving images, narratives relating to the story, and landscape. The third is behind a piece of glass that I stand behind at times and use as a sounding board, knocking on it or painting on it. The projections on this screen are a series of color images or stills that I took when I visited Iceland to work on the piece and record the landscape. I continue to work with these ideas. I worked with the composer Alvin Lucier. I'll show you a clip. Oh, we need sound. I'm sorry. Can you bring the sound up? I'm sorry, but I'll play this anyway. So, I worked with the composer Alvin Luce. In each of my works, I've either made my own soundtracks or worked with a composer. Tilda Swinton played the main part in Volcano Saga. The characters in an Icelandic saga are more three-dimensional as they are based on real historical figures. Fairy tales were two-dimensional, cardboard cutouts. Oh.
Yeah, it's not working.
It's not working. Sorry. Can we make it work?
Oh, I'm trying.
I know. I'm really sorry. This is my...
To the stream.
Here we are.
And that was the end of that dream.
I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back because I think that you should hear this. And also later. I won't go back to the ones you missed. Oh. Well, maybe I will.
I've had many dreams this winter. And 4 of them in particular have disturbed me greatly. No one has understood them to my satisfaction. But I'm not just asking for a pleasing interpretation.
Tell me your dreams. It may be I can make something of them.
I dreamt I was standing outside near a stream. I was wearing a headdress on my head, but I felt that it didn't become me, so I was anxious to change it. A lot of people warned me not to, but I paid no attention to them, and tore the headdress off my head and threw it into the stream. And that was the end of that dream.
Okay, I'm going to quickly go back and I'll show you just, we won't linger, but I do think it's nice if you can just get an idea of these pieces. So, I'm not sure how to get this to play. Okay. So I'll just say that every time we started filming on the docks, a boat would go by, like it was planned that way. So we used 2 lenses, a telephoto lens. The film is a translation of the performance. Now I'll just show you. Now the next one is, this is the first part of Organic Honey's visual telepathy. One of the first performances, but it was in Castelli Gallery, just to give you an idea of what it was, give you an idea of the feeling of the time and this piece. No, but I'm just, I wanted to play, I love that, I still love that piece. When I went to London, I think in the early 1970, I met Richard Long, and he told me about, I didn't know about reggae music, and he told me about it. I went to Portobello Road, and I found, several recordings, and that was the one I chose. And until recently, I just went to Jamaica again to do some more research, and I finally met a Jamaican singer who told me what that song was, because it's hard to find. You can't really find it. And I love to hear it, I have to say. So I'll just quickly say that I made a series of pieces called Minor Theater, because I wanted to make miniature theaters in which I would not appear live. And so they were shaped like a cone, and you can see one in the background there. And I made films that were specifically designed for the interior of these boxes. And I won't go into detail because there are 6 of them so far. And that's my dog, Xena, that I'm drawing. She's sitting very well, very quietly, letting me draw her. And the next image is in one of the minor theater pieces. And it's just an example of drawing on the body. I put a wet sheet over my body and drew my figure through it like exposing my skeleton away on the outside of the sheet. And this was part of that, one of the minor theater pieces. This summer that I made this work, it's Minor Theater 3, called In the Shadow of Shadow. And I had this discipline of getting up every morning and making something. So this was one of the things I made one day. Of course, I didn't succeed every day. One can't do that, but it was a discipline. I tried. I think I should do it again. I'm thinking of doing it, starting now. Maybe. Lines in the Sand was based on a long poem called Helen and Egypt, written by H.D. or Hilda Doolittle, an American writer living in the early part of the 20th century, who was analyzed by Sigmund Freud in the 1930s. I also included quotes from her memoir, Tribute to Freud. It was written right before the Second World War. I grew up in the Second World War. This is a shot of the installation of that piece. And it was more or less commissioned by Okwe Enwezor for Documenta. I can't remember the number, but the one before, yeah, whatever. Yeah. It was written before, I grew up in the Second World War. War is a background condition. Here's a video. This is from the performance. And this is another way I draw in performance on large pieces of paper with sticks, with chalk or oil stick. And I was drawing a step pyramid because, in relation to the story. In the background you see shots of Las Vegas lights, because we went to Las Vegas to do research. There's a casino called Luxor in Las Vegas, and it's representing the fake Egypt. Helen of Troy was blamed for the Trojan War. Of course, a woman had to be blamed. H.D.'s account is based on a classical reference that stated that Helen never went to Troy, but went to Egypt. The Helen that was in Troy was a phantom, a copy. It was actually a trade war. I was thinking of the fact that we are still at war, and that the true reasons are never made explicit. I was interested in these historical mythic female figures, and the echoing theme of the double. Visiting Las Vegas, where we recorded scenes in a casino called Luxor. The fake Luxor was juxtaposed against the real Egypt, representing the work by the photographs that my grandmother took when she visited Egypt at the end of the 19th century. This was an echoing of the theme of the double. I do not play Helen. These are 2 of us performing, echoing the real and the fake. In this case, yeah, I'm making a drawing of a step pyramid that involves moving with my body while making a mark. I often become obsessed with one form. In this case, the pyramid and the Sphinx. I drew these images again and again in real time, and also for a video that I made of the same. I never know how long these clips are, but all right. I'll let this clip play a little bit. This is the first piece I made with Jason Moran.
Of being a seismograph, assembled from the wooden pieces of a plant that has been transplanted from the east into the fertile northern German plains, and onto which an Italian branch was grafted. I let the signs that I receive come out of me, because in this epoch of chaotic decline, even the weakest has the duty to strengthen the will to cosmic order.
This is in the basement of Deer Beacon in 2007. Did I start it? I guess it did stop. Around 2003, I started to develop the shape, the scent, the feel of things. The title of the piece is a quote from H.D.'s writing, but the piece was based on a book by Abby Warburg, Images from the Region of the Pueblo Indians of North America. In the early part of the 20th century, Warburg, a German art historian, visited the Southwest and saw certain ceremonies of an indigenous people as the Hopi. Through his writing, I returned to my own memory of seeing the snake dance of the Hopi in Arizona. I thought of this space as a mental hospital because Warburg could not really report or write about this piece until he had had a nervous breakdown and was in a mental hospital in Switzerland. Through his writing, I returned to it. The piece was designed for an immense space in the basement of this old factory building of Deer Beacon. In 2005, I began to work with Jason Moran, the jazz composer, who composed music and played live in the piece. This has been a long-lasting and important collaboration, Jason and I, although right now, we did a number of pieces together, and now we're going to perform one of them in Japan that I'm going to show you a little bit of in December when I go to Japan. We continued to work together for Reading Dante, Reanimation, and They Come to Us Without a Word. I designed a large screen on wheels that moved in and out of the corridor sideways, moving toward and away from the audience, expanding and shrinking the space. It appeared as a fourth wall. Props included a stuffed coyote, a long snake-like structure on wheels, and various sound devices. The piece was really developed around the text and then developed into a script. My research took me to the desert landscapes of the southwest of America and Southern California, and woods and beaches of Canada. And in no way do I represent any Hopi imagery, and I use elements, certain elements like the coyote or the snake, because many cultures work with those elements. And in no way does my movement relate to the movements I saw. But this piece that I saw of the snake dance of the Hopi in the 60s has haunted me all my life. And in a way, I had to address it in some way and bring it into the present. In one scene, I play Woody Guthrie's Pastures of Plenty. It's sung by a singer, and it's sung against the backdrop of this ruins of a modernist hotel in the Salton Sea, in a way, so bringing other references to America and the decay of America, or other references that imply the situation that we now live in. This scene where I paint the snake is an example of, you can put the sound up a little bit. Oh, sorry. It's an example of how layers of action occur in relation to the space and the projection. I move with the music to paint the snake in a condensed period of time, while the other performer, Ragini, pulls and swings the snake-like row of canvases on wheels, Projected behind this is an image of a stick being used as a drawing tool to draw curving lines in the sand. An irrational animal figure. Well, I think you get the general idea of this section because there's one more section. So this is one of my favorite pieces of music, and the character, it represents the character of Warburg leaving the hospital, and the particular architecture of the Dia Beacon allowed me to do this scene in this way. And of course, I've redone this piece, but you could never do it in the way that I did, that was done for this piece. Because you could open the doors, the garage doors. And Jason and I worked together for 6 weeks on the music, on developing this piece in this space, where he would bring I would show him my videos, which were all worked out, and then he would bring music and the text, and his music would inspire my movements. I had to work out the choreography, so his music inspired my choreography, and my choreography suggested solutions for the music. The next piece, Reanimation. Oh, this is, I just want to show you this cute little man. His name, he's not a cute little man, he's Ande Sambe, and he's actually a human rights lawyer. He's a Sami in Norway, and he recorded sound for me because I met him when I worked on this piece, Reanimation, and I don't know if any of you have ever heard Sami singing. It's very beautiful and very abstract, and it represents sounds of, say, a reindeer or a fish or a fly. And it's everybody. There are certain traditional ones. For me, he made up another one because he didn't want to use the traditional one. But this is his Sami costume that he wears. It was at the Tate when I was working at the Tate. And he came to a conference dressed in his costume. He's a wonderful man. Reanimation was first shown in an outdoor in a house, and you looked through the windows to see the video and the props and so on. I then remade it as an installation with screens, Soji screens, which I had been working on in my time in Japan. I'd been there quite a few times, and I was interested in these screens. It was the first piece where I wanted to include questions about the problems in the environment in my work. I based it on a Haldor Laxness book called Under the Glacier. It's a work of fiction. And of course, I was struck by Haldor Laxness's writing and the way he writes about nature in a very poetic way. And in particular, Under the Glacier, the minute I thought of the word glacier, when I was working on this, when I began to work on it, I thought, well, they're melting, which is true. And now they're melting faster, as you know. And so Reanimation includes references to that. So there's water. I shot a film underwater some years ago in a swimming pool with myself and other women swimming underwater in the swimming pool, shot from above, of course. And I included that because I wanted to imply the water world that is rising. So from that time, I began to work with problems about the environment, although I'd worked with nature and landscape before. So this is the way, what you see here are 3 screens, and there's a crystal structure, and these are the landscape. I actually shot this piece. Volcano Saga was shot in Iceland. I decided to go to Norway because I had a friend who invited me to the Lofoten Islands. And I often go where I'm invited, and I don't have to illustrate the story, so I shot it in Norway, most of it, a lot of it. And I made a crystal structure referring to snow, and referring to the crystals in the glacier and in the snow. So I thought of the audience walking into this space and seeing the videos in a much clearer way and hearing the sound, rather than looking through the windows of the little house. So this is the way it's shown. And I made a drawing in the performance with ink and ice, because I thought of course the ice is obvious. The ink to me represents pollution and oil. And the drawing is made by pouring a little bit of ink, then the ice, and then spreading the ice out and making a drawing. And I made many of these in the performance. I'm going to show you a clip now from that performance of Reanimation, and I have to say it's one of my favorite pieces of Jason's. We used it more than once. I'm making drawings as fast as I can of birds. In response to a laxness description of a certain bird that stands facing the wind and doesn't get blown over. It's a very beautiful, I'm not quoting it quite in the right way. Soon. I'm looking at it. Somebody asked me about ritual, and I say, a word associated with ritual is repetition. So drawing can be a ritual in that way. Movement, of course. So Jason, of course, is playing live whenever we work together. Okay. So the next image is from a piece called They Come to Us Without a Word, which was in the Venice, when I represented the United States in the Venice Biennale. And it was called They Come to Us Without a Word. It started out as in Japan. I was going to Japan in 2014. This is 2015, I think. And I thought of how much fish the Japanese eat. Of course, we do too. But I wanted to make 100 drawings, and I made an installation of 100 drawings, ink drawings of fish that were hung up in an installation. And so they became part of this piece. And in the Venice Biennale, there were 4 rooms. So this is an example of one work segueing into another. I quoted Laxness about bees. He has a beautiful quote about bees and the miraculous aspect of nature, how bees make honey. You know, nature is miraculous, I think. I wanted to make a piece about animals and include children as performers. For me, this represented the fact of our fragile environment that children will inherit. In each room, there were 2 projections. One concerned the main subject, the bees, the fish, the wind, and the homeroom, in which the children drew animals, for instance. The other projection in each room concerned ghost stories from the oral tradition of Cape Breton, Canada. I thought of the ghosts of creatures. And then this is a little clip from the bee room of the video. We actually filmed beehives and projected, the children performed actually the pattern of a bee dance in this projection. And this is one of the projections in the installation. Then later we did a live performance in Venice, and they did this. These children were all in that performance, except the two older, I used to call them girls, now I would say the two older young women who were in this piece 5 years ago. All right, I'm showing you, the next piece is the main video about wind from the room, Wind, and you'll see how the music is slightly altered, you just heard. And the performers are the children. One of them is Zora Casabir, and the other one is Lila Gavigan. Oops, no, this is just another image of one of the, that's Willa Schwabsky, and another young woman from Canada. And now, can you turn the music up? Thank you. Just quickly, in this piece, Stream or River Flight or Pattern, birds are the major presence. I also continued to work with children. I recorded video in Vietnam, Spain, Singapore, and Italy for this piece. I projected the video on the wall, the videos on the wall in my loft, and then performed in front of the projections, as I have done so often through the years. The thread of my work from the very beginning has always been my role as performer. I step into a piece and move, guided by the music, the text, the props, and other performers. And this is just one little, these are Venice floors. And then I'll show you one section. It was filmed in Santander, Spain.
Is only the voice of the trees ready for stillness. The air is soundless. It belongs to someone on this side. What
those were workshop students.
If a grouper chases a fish into a reef crevice, it uses its body to point to the hidden prey until the slender eel goes after it. If the hapless quarry escapes to open water, the grouper is waiting. Both partners die more often by working together. How do we know being petted feels good to a fish? They ask for it. Friendly groupers swim up to divers to receive strokes, and moray eels will cuddle with trusted divers. Even some shark species love getting face and belly rubs from experienced divers. Don't try this yourself.
In the last piece, they were from my workshop in Santander, Spain, and Alison, who I met at Columbia University, sang the song. I gave her a pastiche of a Japanese poem. I gave her the words, and she chose the tune and sang it in a beautiful way. So I'm just going to the next piece called Moving Off the Land, which was commissioned by an organization called TBA 21, whose purpose is to explore the oceans and to try to save it, which is a pretty big task. But so they're commissioning different artists to do works in relation to the ocean. And so I did a performance about, I think I started it 3 years ago, and I just made an installation as the final version of that piece, Moving Off the Land, in Venice, in a church called San Lorenzo. And I'm going to show you, I'll just read you what I wrote about that piece. I continue to explore the ideas in my recent piece, Moving Off the Land. The situation facing the planet is dire, and I am profoundly saddened by this crisis. However, I'm grateful through my work to have gained a deeper understanding for creatures both in the ocean and on the land. I believe if we understand the importance of these miraculous creatures, we can better understand ourselves and live in harmony. And I didn't bring the material, but I found images of the installation. I worked with a marine biologist, David Gruber, also on this piece. And so the children in the Moving Off the Land too are the same children that you saw. Now we're just, that's an image from the performance. You didn't see it. That's an image of me standing against a drawing of a starfish. But that's just performative image. And so what I'm about to show you is I made large minor theaters that you could walk into for this installation. And I made, a lot of drawings that we enlarged and hung around. It was in a big church with, I left the scaffolding up, I liked the roughness of it. There were 3 big boxes and 2 smaller minor theaters. And I'll just show you the images. In each box there was a different section. I think about an hour-long worth of videos. I traveled all over the place and went to a lot of aquariums. David Gruber gave me some footage, fantastic footage. And this is Jason's. So Jason's twins are in this piece, that's one of them. And so these are all children and friends of mine. And I think pretty soon I can't say children. But I like to go back to these performers. I like the idea that I invite them every year or every other year to come and perform. And this time, instead of them, they were actually, that was it. But instead of having them just simply move, I had them all speaking. And so they all speak certain passages from Moving Off the Land about the ocean, quoting Rachel Carson and other people. Anyway, but that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, John, for the amazing lecture and for sharing this material. I'm sure there will be many questions from the audience. I don't know if there is anybody around with a microphone to help. Anybody who wants to start?
All right.
Yes. Let's see.
Oh, doesn't bring me a mic. I can yell pretty loud. I'm just curious how you navigate working with groups. From your early works, you had like 50 people standing on that building. That's more friends than I've had in my whole life, so very impressive. But up into the end work, what role do you usually take? Are you giving directions? Do you let things happen organically? Or what have you learned from working with groups as the leader?
Well, the people on the roof were not performers, they were the audience. And when I began in the late 60s, early 70s, just to give you a picture, you know, we had to do everything ourselves. We had to, you know, build up our own audiences. Me, not alone, but with a friend or two, went around putting posters all over Soho if I was going to do a performance. And that was the way we spread the word. You had to spread the word, and then word spreads through word of mouth. So those people were audience on the roof. And people at that time were used to going to places like that. I'm really basically the director. I direct the pieces, and I tell people what to do. I also demonstrate movements, and I develop the videos beforehand. In the early works, they were all friends. At that time, when you're younger as an artist, people have more time. Now, it would be hard to ask all my friends to come and be in my performance. Some of them would, but these children that I work with are children of friends, who are like Lorna Simpson's daughter, and Barry Schwabsky and his daughter, and Jason's sons, and then another young man whose mother now is at Wesleyan University. So that's the way I gather people together. I liked having, for the children to have friends, children of friends, because I didn't want to put out a call, or I like having friends in my work. With Tilda Swinton, she was a friend of a friend, a very good friend of a very close friend of mine, and that's how I met her and invited her to be in the piece. But usually I don't work with such. At the time when I worked with her, well, it was in the 80s. It was a little while ago. But it's hard I don't know how to answer your question exactly. You know, I direct. You can think of me as a director, but also an artist. I'm an artist, but I direct. What can I say? Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
You mentioned, thank you. You mentioned in your lecture that you try to be culturally sensitive and aware of cultural appropriation. What work do you do and research do you do to make sure that is happening?
What
What kind of work and research do you do to make sure you are being culturally sensitive for other
I can only
voices?
say that I try to be well informed and know what's going on. And there's some very obvious things that you don't have to even do any research about. You're culturally sensitive toward colonization, for instance. There were examples that I used, which was, I don't have to do that all the time because I'm not dealing with that material all the time. But in relation to any Native American work, which I've never, except for this piece concerning Abby Warburg, I've never used anything. I didn't use anything from the culture, but I mentioned it. He did. What he did was take photographs and write about it. And then the one drawing, I just acknowledge that I used that drawing. But I do believe, I don't think Iceland comes into that category, for instance. On one level, I think we could share things. I don't know if that satisfies your answer, but I think that I'm aware. I just think I'm inherently aware. I think it's something that we've been thinking about for, in my case, 50 years. How to work with that and how to deal with it. But I know it's a big issue in many situations. And I try to follow the news and to see what's going on. Does that answer your question?
It's an answer.
I mean, I'll tell you, for the Shake the Scent the Field things, I went and lived on the Hopi Reservation. I had a student who was Hopi, I talked to her. I talked to her father. I talked to anthropologists. So I do a lot of thinking and research.
Oh, sorry, I was just testing. Throughout your practice, I seen like you use Mirror and use like live stream video channels, and I was just wondering, like, I seen a lot of like self-reflection and a lot of like concept of rethinking about our perceptions and rethinking about it, and it made me think about, like, at the end of the day, like, the word is us. And
I'm sorry, I don't understand you quite. Can you repeat it?
throughout your piece or your practice, I figure a lot of your uses of Mirror and your uses of the live stream channels, and you have like a multi-channel like video pieces that you're aware that viewers are watching, and you're aware of the censorship as well.
Just, well, before you go on, I don't use live stream channels.
Oh, whenever you're drawing and you're aware of the monitor, and then you're looking at the monitor and then you're drawing.
Yeah,
I was thinking as a live stream, like.
it's like a closed circuit.
Yeah. So in that sense, I was thinking a lot about our perceptions and how we perceive ourselves, and in like how do we like find the middle ground of yourself and the word? Because at the end of the day, like the word is us and ourselves are the word. And I was curious about your personal approach to life and yourself, about how you find the middle point of it, because everyone has different middle points in between the word and themselves.
I'm very sorry, but I don't understand your question quite, the subtlety of your question. Could you
very-
repeat the
yeah.
last part? Everybody has,
Oh yeah, everyone has their own like middle point of the word in themselves. And I was curious about your personal approach to it, about, because at the end of the day, the word is us, and the ourself is the word. If you could understand that part.
well, I don't use autobiography. My body is myself, so you recognize me. And the subject matter is something that I've chosen. It's my concern intellectually, and maybe I have an emotional relation to it. When I work in my own work, I don't think of it's myself, because it's, I'm trying to construct, it's like a writer, you know. All writers relate somehow to themselves, but they don't tell stories. You don't have to be autobiography, or it doesn't have to be a story of their lives. But of course you work with your own experience. But I don't work with my experience quite in that way that a writer does. But there's a relationship of how to talk about it, how to talk about how people make work. It comes out of your own perception of the world. Do you want to ask another question about that? I mean, I think it's a difficult question.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of personal too. But I also want. So yeah, I'll pass.
And if the person who asked me about appropriation wants to talk to me afterwards, I'd be glad to talk to you. I just want to say again about that, that I didn't appropriate anything in that piece. It's a reference.
I was just, oh, that's loud. I was wondering what you see as the future of the type of art that you make, and also the greatest challenges that you see in the future for the type of art that you make.
Well, I think people are developing that way of working, for sure, and it will continue. I was saying to somebody, I was talking to somebody today or yesterday, saying that I don't have time anymore to go around to a lot of galleries, nor the energy, and so I can't really talk about everything that people are doing now. I try to pay attention.
I think the media will change, for sure. And all the words, I was talking to Seth Price, I interviewed Seth. I know him quite well for quite a while. And, certain words, the internet, streaming, all these words that were used for a long time are changing. And I think that your perception of the world is very different from mine. And I can't see the world the way you see it. It's just impossible for me to see that. But I'm interested in seeing that. I try to read work by young writers. There's a writer called Sally Rooney, who, I don't know if any of you have heard of her. She's an Irish writer. But anyway, how do they see the world? It's very different from the way somebody else sees the world. And they deal with it in a different way in their work. So I think there are many ways of dealing with the world that we live in. We're living in a very difficult world. I think the issue of the environment and of, there are many issues that will become more and more urgent. And I think it will come into the work more and more. And the future, I think, is very difficult for young people. What is the future? It's very complicated. It's a very, you're all asking very good questions. That we could have a seminar on each. But I don't know exactly the future. But I do think that the media, I call myself an old-fashioned video artist. I work with a video camera, I edit, and I present linear work, and I work with sculpture and drawings. And I call myself old-fashioned because I don't work with new media, as they call it, really. But I think many people are working in that way. I'm sure many people in this room are.
Thank you. That was a great answer. You want to say this back here?
This is kind of a specific question, but this is kind of a specific question, but you mentioned you were at Anthology Film Archives a lot. Did Jonas Mekas ever inspire any of your work? And did he inspire you at all?
Jonas Mekas, not his actual films. They didn't, because they're very different. They're much more, they're much more documentary style. They're about the people around him and subjects around him, real things. But he was inspiring in that he made the Anthology Film Archives. He started it, he established it. I learned all about film there. When I was rehearsing Mirage, for instance, I was rehearsing one day and I was moving the screen, with these electric devices. And he came in with another man, P. Adams Sidney, and P. Adams said to him, "She's going to break the screen if she keeps doing that." And he said, "Oh, let her, she's an artist." So I'd say that could be very inspiring. And he was a wonderful man. He just passed away very recently.
One last question here in the front.
Sarah.
I was wondering, I'm curious about, you said you never perform in your installations. Why is that? And where do you draw the line? Because the performance specifically where you're talking about Las Vegas and Egypt seemed very much like an installation.
No, that's like in the kitchen, that performance. Because the stage is not set up so the audience has to have a certain view. So the audience has to sit in a certain place. And in the installations, there's no room for an audience to sit. I don't like to perform in galleries where everybody's standing up and you can't see anything. I like to have a situation in which the audience sees what I want them to see. So it's either in the kitchen or another space like that, or outdoors, or at Dia Beacon in that big, huge space. In the installation, in the performances, I very carefully design the space of the performance. There's a stage, there are objects, there are props, there's a projection screen, and it's a very frontal experience. It's related to theater in that way. And I also
reconstruct the pieces so it's not the same exact piece. You know, it's different for every piece, but they're reconstructed. For instance, for the shape, the set, the feel of things, I made an installation out of that. You know, you have to take one version apart and put it back together again for the other situation.
Thank you very much.